Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David. You're very calm today. And welcome,
Yes.
everyone. Welcome, everyone, to episode 206. This is another Cognitive Distortion, How to Crush Negative Thoughts, the Cognitive Distortion Kit. And today we're working on the cognitive distortion of blaming, self-blame and other blame.
Which is one of the toughest, most destructive of all distortions. But before we dive in, I have to explain my subdued hello, Rhonda, today.
Yes. Why did you do that?
Well, we got our second criticism on YouTube because of my goofy hello world types of things. There, I got one in, which this fellow said it irritates him. It sounds unprofessional, and that I'm losing credibility because of the goofy openings, and that he's reluctant to refer people to the Feeling Good podcasts. So I'm reluctantly going back to normal, which is pretty easy to do. And you folks can tell us if you prefer the new professional sound, or if you'd prefer to have the goofy David back. I did give them up once in the past. A fellow from Guatemala, Eduardo, who's a tremendous fan and a terrific fellow, sent an email. I thought he was also complaining about them, so I gave them up months ago. And then he emailed and said, no, I was trying to tell you that I love the goofy hello Rhondas, so I started them up again. But we'll let you folks be the decider there, because we're just grateful to have all of you as fans, and super grateful to have this chance every week to kind of schmooze with you and share our feelings. I think you have something to read there, and then we can dive right into blame, because this is a huge topic.
I do. This is from a listener who's a pretty dedicated listener, actually, Joe, and he writes, "Hello, Dr. Burns. Congratulations on your 200th podcast. I'm wondering if you and Rhonda would consider recording a short podcast explaining your Feeling Good concepts, the Team CBT concepts, in an overview or an introduction style. Because as I share your podcasts with others via social media, I would love to point them to a quick overview of your concepts. And by the way, the chemistry between you and Rhonda has been great."
Well, thanks for that, Joe. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness, and we will do that. We won't do it today, but we'll have an upcoming podcast with a brief overview of team and how it's similar to cognitive therapy and other schools of therapy, and also the many ways that it's really pretty radically different. And especially because of my new book, Feeling Great, which has just come out, I'll need to learn how to explain to people briefly, what is feeling great? What is the essence of it? How does it work? And why should we be excited about it? So we'll certainly do that. And if you haven't, you should be able to get a copy of the new book, Feeling Great, on Amazon now. So order a copy if you're interested. It has all of the original cognitive therapy techniques updated and even more powerful than when I wrote Feeling Good, plus all the new team techniques to melt away resistance, techniques that make ultra rapid recovery possible. And so take a look, and hope it's helpful to you. Hope you enjoy it. Now, blame is the last of our 10 distortion podcasts, and there's two versions of blame. There's self-blame and other blame. And self-blame often or nearly always goes along with shoulds directed against the self, like I shouldn't have screwed up and it's all my fault and I'm a loser and I'm never going to get this right. and stuff like that. And then other blame goes along with should statements directed against other people. So you shouldn't have said that. You're wrong. You're to blame for this problem, and you better admit that you're wrong. And self blame can often cause death, and other blame can often cause death. I've had many patients who blame themselves for something that in a way they weren't really responsible for, but they were so much believing that they were to blame that they were on the verge of suicide. For example, I once treated a woman who was married to this really neat guy, a very handsome, muscular fellow. He worked out a lot, and he was totally devoted to her. But she she wasn't sexually attracted to him, and she could only get sexually attracted to real sleazy types of guys who she would have affairs with and just hate herself. And the the day before she came to her first session, she told me that last night I was looking in the mirror with a razor blade to my neck,
Oh my God.
trying to debate whether to slit my throat
Oh.
or come in for a therapy session, because she was blaming herself for having these sexual impulses that seem forbidden. And then when we worked together, she revealed that when she was young, she was sexually abused by an older man, but actually enjoyed it. And it's probably politically incorrect to say that, but that was the truth of what happened. And she was also blaming herself for that I never should have done that. I shouldn't have enjoyed it, and things like that. I might say that case, like many cases of self-blame, had a gloriously successful outcome. We could perhaps talk about sometime if our listeners are interested.
Oh, maybe we
But
could talk about it now, because did you use various techniques to help her overcome her self-blame?
Yeah, absolutely. You see, in this case, the problem isn't that she's to blame, but that she's blaming herself, which creates intense feelings of shame and self-hatred and depression. And we just use regular cognitive therapy techniques to identify the distortions and the thoughts, and talk back to them using externalization of voices and the acceptance paradox, and just to accept the fact and to love herself in spite of the fact that her sexual impulses weren't exactly the way she wanted them to be. That's not something you can exactly control, and we're all kind of stuck with our sexual fantasies and impulses, and you can either accept yourself and love yourself, or you can, hate yourself and beat up on yourself. Well, once she accepted herself, she then made the courageous decision to bring her husband into the picture, and to invited him in. And then in my office, she shared with me what had been going on, because she'd been hiding all of this out of shame. And she told him she loved him, but this is why she didn't have sexual attraction. And he was absolutely devastated to learn this, but decided to hang in there, and she decided to hang in there, and they had some sessions, and we began using kind of like the Masters and Johnson technique, that they're not allowed to have intercourse, but she would guide his hands over her body, in a pleasurable way, until she began to get anxious, and ashamed and upset. And then she would they use this as a sexual device, the daily mood log on a clipboard. And she would grab it and start writing down her negative thoughts, and then share them with him. It was really cool, and it was very helpful to them.
Oh my gosh, what a unique way of using the daily mood log. I
Yeah,
love
this is
that.
a new technique I have to add to my list of 100
I know
techniques.
you
This will be
do.
number 169, maybe. But it really worked out. And then the next session, she divulged, some of her fantasies, which
Was he still there with you in the next
yeah,
session?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
And
cool.
which was to make love with other people watching them.
Uh-huh.
And he said he had the same fantasy.
Huh.
So for homework, I sent them to some nudist colony I'd heard about in New Jersey. I'd never been there, but I said maybe you two could go. And they got all excited about that. And then they came back the next week and said all their problems had been solved and they were totally happy now and ready to terminate therapy. And I never heard from her again for years. And then I was at a farmer's market on a Saturday with my kids. We used to go in Ardmore to the farmer's market and order these Weaver's sausage sandwiches, which were to die for. If they're still there and you're in Philadelphia, you should go to Ardmore to the farmer's market and get a Weaver's sausage sandwich because it's one of the greatest things in the surface of the earth. They're so delicious. It's unbelievable. And so we had gotten them, and then this woman approached me, and she had a baby in a stroller, and one that was just a toddler walking with her, and another one that was clinging to her shoulder.
Mm.
And she walked up to me, and she said, "Do you remember who I am?" I said, "Oh, yes, yes, great to see you." And she said, "Well, as you can see, Dr. Burns, your techniques were very effective." And I was just so happy to hear
Wow.
that. But that was a classic example of self-blame. And I would say nearly 100% of listeners who have experienced depression have experienced self-blame and beating up on yourself for every little flaw.
So then
And
do you think that self-blame is always an attribute or a characteristic of depression?
I wouldn't say always, but I'd say 90% of the time or better,
Uh-huh.
that it's kind of self-blame is kind of what depression is. Feeling low self-esteem and shame and guilt and inferiority and inadequacy and thinking that there's something wrong with you and you're not good enough and you're defective and you're to blame for a lot of bad things that are going on. But self-blame usually has just an outstanding prognosis, especially now that we've got our positive reframing and double standard technique and all externalization of voices, acceptance paradox, identify the distortion. All that stuff works great for self-blame. But the other form of blame is much harder. Other blame, and that's where you're blaming someone else for the problems in your relationship or for something that went wrong and directing shoulds at the other person. And I think you had a beautiful example of this for us.
I do. Over the weekend, my husband Michael and I were going to go bike riding, and I worked Saturday in the morning. So his job was to put the bike rack and the bikes on the car while I was at work, so that as soon as I came home, we were going to go off and go on this bike ride. And so we did that. And when we arrived at the place where we were going to go for this bike ride, and we took the bikes off, neither of the bikes fit me. Michael brought the wrong bikes, and the thing, all the knobs to adjust the bikes were rusted, so we couldn't adjust the bike, so we couldn't go on this bike ride. And during the COVID and the shelter in place, it feels to me like when things like that happen, I don't have the reserves of patience because I feel like I've lost my anchor in a way. And so I got really angry at him, and I just did a lot of other blaming. Then it was all his fault. Then our whole day was ruined, and we both kind of, put the bikes back on the car and stormed home and fumed at each other. And, as I was driving home, I was thinking about how I'd do the 5 secrets, but I didn't feel ready to do it. So when I came home, I got out some paper, and I thought, well, this could be a good way of practicing the technique of reattribution, where I could look at the various or multiple factors that contributed to the problem between us and to the situation. And I thought to myself, well, what caused the problem of us not going for a bike ride and leading to this big fight. And what did I contribute to the problem? What did Michael contribute to the problem? What was the explanation? And what was the solution? And what, and after answering those questions with myself, I could then go back to Michael and see what I contributed and be disarming and really put myself in his position and see what he felt and share what I felt. And it led to a lot, the resolution of our fight and a lot more closeness between us. And he thanked me. And then we went on and had a nice later evening and made plans for another bike ride.
Well, that's a beautiful example, and it works because of your graciousness, your gentleness, your love for your husband, your willingness to examine your own role in the problem, and your willingness to give up that moral superiority that comes with blame. But much of the world, probably most of the world, doesn't want to give up blame. The reason that blame is so hard, it's addictive. And people want to feel better than other people. People want to blame others, want to look down on other people and be angry. And it's unfortunate, but I think it's right in our genes that we have a part of the human nature that wants love and joy and peace and positivity and creativity, and another part of our nature that's attracted to the lower forces of rage and anger and blame and revenge and so forth. I heard a powerful example of it actually on TV. There was a program about road rage, and this fellow was driving. I don't know. Have I told this story? Do you recall already?
I think you've told it at an intensive, but I don't remember if you've told it on a podcast. But it's such an interesting story. I think it's worth it.
Yeah. I'll give a shot at it and apologize for my senility ahead of time. I haven't lost my creativity, but I am getting a little demented here and there, which, by the way, I greatly enjoy it. You become a here and now person. It's like enlightenment type of thing. But at any rate,
it helps you stay in the moment.
Yeah, I'll just give the short version of it, but this fellow was going in the slow lane, was going slowly in the fast lane, and these teenagers in a big, truck pulled up right behind him and started, honking at him and flipping birds and shouting at him and blasting with the horn, and so he got ticked off and slowed down even more, and then they got up like within 6 inches of him, and shouting out the window at him and honking on the horn. So, he slowed down to about 10 miles an hour.
Wow.
And these kids were just exploding. And so he, kind of motions, kind of said, like, follow me. And he pulled off on the edge of the road, like, we're going to have a fight type of thing. And they pulled out right up behind him. And he jumped out of his car and opened the trunk and pulled out a crossbow.
Oh my God.
And meanwhile, these boys started, coming at him. We're going to beat the tar out of you, you old such and such. So he took aim at one of the boys and pulled the trigger and put a bullet through his heart. Not a bullet, but an arrow.
An arrow.
And he fell and bled to death.
Oh my God.
And then he pulled out another one and calmly loaded it and took aim at the other boy and hit him right in the spinal cord.
Oh.
And he fell to the ground, paralyzed from the waist down for
oh my
life.
God. Oh my God.
And some motorists, were driving by, saw this and got his license number. And after he shot the boys, he calmly put it in the trunk of his car and just drove off at a normal speed.
Oh my God.
And then he was arrested and put in prison and given a life sentence. And then the TV crew were like from some television show, 2020 or 60 Minutes or something, and they asked him if he had any remorse about this, rage and blame. He was blaming these boys, and they were blaming him. That's the whole basis of almost all human conflict that leads to war and divorce and people beating one another and killing one another. And he said, remorse, he says, you've got to be crazy. He says, that was the greatest thing I ever did. That was the biggest accomplishment of my life, and I think about it constantly, and it puts me in a state of euphoria.
Wow.
He says, if I had to do it again, I'd do exactly the same thing.
Oh my God, that makes
And
me sick to my stomach.
yeah, and it just shows the power of hatred, and we can see it in politics. People like to split into two groups. Imagine our group is good, your group is bad, you're jerks, you're stupid, you're hostile, and we're morally superior. And it's very, very primitive and very basic, and other blame and rage are far harder to treat than self-blame and depression, because when you get over self-blame and depression, you discover your thoughts were distorted and you're way better than what you thought.
Right.
And so when I can prove to you your thoughts are distorted, you're going to love me because you're going to feel joy instead of despair. But when you're involved in other blame, I'm going to show you that your thoughts are distorted, and you're going to find out you're far worse than what you thought.
Right.
And that's not an easy sell,
No.
because people don't want to have the death of the self, the death of the pride, the death of the ego, and begin to look at your own role in a problem rather than blaming the other
Because then wouldn't the
person.
patient blame you to the therapist?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they get really ticked off. I've been trying to tell you, doctor, that my husband is to blame. And he's self-centered, and he's no good, and he shouldn't be that way, and all he cares about is himself, and he never listens, and he'll never change. Well, that's all the 10 cognitive distortions. It's blame, it's all or nothing thinking, it's emotional reasoning, it's mind reading, it's should statements, it's discounting the positive, it's mental filters, all the 10 distortions. But she doesn't want to hear the doctor say, no, my dear, your husband isn't making you angry, you're making you angry. And the thoughts that make you angry are all wrong, wrong, wrong. Well,
Right.
now she's got two enemies, her husband and her therapist, whom she'll quickly fire.
Right.
So we have to go at it from a completely different angle. But one method that can be really helpful, should I tell a method for that?
Yes, let's tell the method.
And kind of my wife tipped me off to it, that when you're talking about other blame and anger, it's really a motivational issue before it's a cognitive issue. And so one of the techniques is to simply do a cost-benefit analysis. Take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle from top to bottom, and label the left-hand column advantages and the right-hand column disadvantages. And then at the top, and then what you can do, you can list the advantages and disadvantages of blaming the other person for the problems in your relationship. And I used this when I was in Philadelphia. I had a new patient referred to me who said he'd had a long history of depression, and no one had been able to treat him. And he also had rage attacks where he was getting into trouble at his hospital where he worked. And I said, well, give me an example of one of your rage attacks. Well, this doctor was a researcher, and he had a lot of integrity. And he had a colleague who was sleazy, whose research was not of high quality, but he was a politician and played the angles and was getting appointments, promotions and grants, whereas my patient, who was doing work honestly. So when you do work honestly, you find out your research doesn't show anything.
Uh-huh.
That's
Sometimes
the
you
proof.
do, yeah.
It's almost always like that. Your hypothesis is wrong, and your results are negative, and then journals don't want to publish it because they're looking for something exciting. And then someone who's kind of being slippery with their data and their statistics comes up with all this pseudo exciting stuff that isn't really valid and kind of gets ahead in the world. And so he was just raging against this fellow, and every now and then and the other fellow, and his thoughts were, he gets promotions and I'm not, and it's unfair, and I'm not getting rewarded for all my hard work and stuff like that. And so I said, well, let's make a list of all the advantages of blaming him, which is the opposite of what most shrinks would do.
Right,
Would be
it definitely
to try to help him. This is one of the forerunners, actually, of team therapy, this patient. And so together we came up with a list of about 12 really good reasons to blame this other fellow and to
Yeah, it
be
sounds like
angry
there was
with
a lot
this.
of them.
Yeah, like it shows that I have a moral standard, and that I'm not going to be slippery with my research, and I'm going to bring a sense of integrity to my work, and I'm not going to play politics and butter up to people who I don't like, and long list.
Yeah, right.
And then we didn't bother to look at the disadvantages. And then at the end, I said, well, given that list, that's overwhelming. It doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you want to give up the blame? Look at all the awesome things it says about you. I think you should continue with the blame and rage attacks. And when I said that, he burst into laughter, and he laughed so hard he almost fell on the floor because he began to see how absurd what he was doing was. He was kind of shooting himself in the foot, and shockingly, his depression completely disappeared. And I just told him, come in one more session for a little tune-up, and then we'll be done. He was absolutely on top of the world. And then that weekend, I jogged with a colleague, Tony Bates, who was working at my clinic, and he had done the intake evaluation on this fellow and the diagnosis. And he said, "Oh, did you get that patient I referred to you? I didn't have time to give you the diagnostic summary. How's he doing?" I said, "Oh, that's fine. He was just such a delightful person and easy to treat. He was a one-session cure." And Tony started laughing and says, "Yeah, stop being sarcastic. I know that's not possible." I said, "What do you mean it's not possible? We just had a fantastic session, and he ended up in a state of laughter, fell on the floor laughing so hard, and all his depression disappeared. He's maybe the easiest patient I've ever worked with." Then he says, "Come on, stop bullshitting me. You know as well as I had, the fellow was very severe." And I said, "What did you talk about?" And he says, "Well, when you see the diagnostic summary, you'll see he had diagnosis blah, 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 which is something that most therapists recognize as, oh, this person is going to be almost untreatable." And said he's had failed therapy for 10, 15, 20 years. He's going to be extremely difficult. And I says, "No, you've got to think it was someone else. It couldn't have been that guy. He couldn't have had that diagnosis. He was absolutely warm and friendly and fun." And Tony says, "Check it out. Monday, when you see the diagnosis, check it out. I did a formal diagnostic assessment using the structured clinical interview system." And Monday I looked, and sure enough, he was right. The fellow had this presumably hopeless, almost prognosis, and yet he'd recovered really quickly when he suddenly saw all the benefits of his rage and his anger, and he just was able to turn it around really quick. And he came in, we had a couple more sessions, did relapse prevention training. The fellow was just totally cured and happy. And
Well, he was cured of his depression, and I could totally see
his
that.
anger attacks
and his
too.
anger,
Yeah.
his rageful attacks.
Yeah.
Did it change his relationship with this other fellow?
That I don't recall, but what he did decide to do was to begin to become a bit more political with the department chairman, and to use more stroking. And we practiced some of those communication techniques. That it doesn't hurt to communicate with people in a way that they'll like you rather than they'll put you down.
Because
he
now you're
picked
also
up on that really quickly.
Yeah, because you're also pointing out that it wasn't really the relationship he had with that other guy or what the other guy was doing. It was his thoughts and his reaction to what the other guy was doing.
Yeah, his should statements. He shouldn't be like that, and I've got every right to be mad, and I'm morally superior, and he's to blame for all the problems I'm having in my life. And once he found a way to give that up, things, it was like a earthquake a good earthquake of change. But it isn't easy for most people to give up blame, and
no, because blame, it feels so good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how did we do today? I mean, we could go on, but we've kind of made some of our points.
I think we've made our points, yeah.
And we thank all of you for joining us in this series of ways to talk back to each of the 10 distortions, and maybe we'll start another series if you're interested. I was thinking we might want to start a series on how to defeat self-defeating beliefs. We've had a
Oh,
couple
I love that.
podcasts on that, but we could go into, perfectionism, achievement addiction, love addiction, entitlement, brushfire fallacy, spotlight fallacy, and so forth. Maybe people can let us know if they would find that interesting, or if you have some other thing you'd like us to do focus on, because there's a lot more techniques we could bring to life for our listeners as well.
Definitely. Okay, well then, thank you so much, David, and to all our listeners. Until next time.
Yeah, and perhaps as a bit of a bridge, so we don't have to give up everything overnight.
Okay.
I will say goodbye, Rhonda.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.